Do you know what is the ideal order in which you should make your new investments? Say you have just come up with some money that you inherited, or your job got you a bonus, or you cut some of your expenses and you have some new available budget every month to invest somewhere. You're wondering where should you invest that money for that money to have the biggest impact in your personal finances. Well, in this video, we're going to talk about 7 different investments that you should consider in the order from the one that is the most urgent to the ones that are a little bit less urgent, or at least you should make only after you've successfully invested in the first ones. Hello, my name is Eduardo Rosas. I have a finance and banking degree and I'm currently studying my master's in financial planning. And in this channel, I talk about everything that we should know about personal finance. So if you're new here, consider subscribing. So in this video, I'm going to talk about 7 different investments from the one that is the most urgent to the least urgent that you should consider making as soon as you have some new money available. Say after cutting some of your expenses or receiving a bonus, an inheritance or something. So the first priority, that is the most urgent of them all, is to have at least $1,000 in an emergency fund. The urgency of this objective cannot be understated. You can see that this objective isn't necessarily the biggest investment of your life. It's not the investment that is going to generate the biggest returns. This investment then is not the most urgent because of the returns that it itself is going to generate, but the returns that it will help you generate with other investments. See, the key of this first $1,000 in an emergency fund is the stability that it provides to you. Without that stability, any emergency in the future could jeopardize your personal finances. It could mean asking for a loan for which, of course, you would have to pay interest. It could mean interrupting your other investments that could themselves be generating high returns just for the sake of paying or facing this emergency. So the reason why this is the most important investment, or the one that you should make before anyone else, is not because of the returns, but because of the stability that it provides to you. Now, the second investment that you should consider, the one that is the most urgent after this first $1,000 in your emergency fund, is to maximize your pension plans. So that is, for example, in the US, to take advantage of matching 401k contributions that your employer could offer. Many times employers offer to match your own personal contributions to your 401k, in the sense that if you contribute 1% of your income, they would contribute the same amount. You can figure out with your employer if they have a similar offering, and if they do, this is the next step where you should focus your efforts, your financial efforts in this case, because it's just essentially free money that you wouldn't get otherwise. If you weren't contributing to your 401k and having that contribution being matched by your employer, you wouldn't be receiving that money at all. So it's just free money that you should take advantage of. Now, the reason why this is not in the first place, and you should first consider getting $1,000 into your emergency fund, is because, again, without an emergency fund, an emergency could mean getting money out of your 401k, which would be just a terrible idea, just to face that emergency. Now, in the US, this maximum contribution into your 401k is $22,500 in 2023, so keep that in mind. In Australia, for example, this second step of maximizing your pension plans would mean maximizing your concessional contribution. So in the financial year 2023-24, that is up to $27,500 Australian dollars. Keep in mind that this concessional contribution is both your superannuation guarantee, so that which your employer contributes, the 11% of your income that your employer contributes in 2023, plus any salary sacrifice. So make sure that the superannuation guarantee plus your salary sacrifice is as close to those $27,500 as possible, so you're maximizing your contribution to your super fund. The third step, the third place where you should consider investing your money, is in paying back your credit cards, because credit cards normally are going to have the highest interest of any debt that you could have. So paying them is crucial and it is urgent. Any money that you destine towards paying your credit card debt is money that is no longer going to generate interest. So that means that this investment could be the one with the highest returns, even better, guaranteed returns that you could ever make. Imagine, for example, that you have $1,000 in debt in a credit card that has a 20% interest rate. That means that $1,000 in a year, to simplify the example, is going to charge $200 in interest alone. But say you pay $100, so your debt is only $900. Now you would only generate $180 of interest. Those $100 that you paid essentially return to you $20. That is a 20% return guaranteed just by paying your credit cards. No other investment in the world can guarantee such high returns as paying your credit card debt. And if there is any investment that is guaranteeing 20% returns in a year, it's probably very likely a scam, so you should probably very quickly run away from it. Anyway, the number 4th step that you should take, the next investment with the highest priority, is the paying of other high interest debt. So usually this would mean personal loans or car loans or something of the sorts that does not include your mortgage, which usually has very low interest rates, but that still would be a very good return of investment to pay this debt. Now, this is not in the same level as paying your credit card debt, because paying your credit card debt is urgent in the sense that you should not destine any money to any other financial goal. Whereas paying your personal loan or paying your car loan could be done at the same time that you continue to grow your emergency fund, for example, because the interest that you're paying is usually lower than what you would pay on a credit card. So it's a little bit less urgent to pay that debt. Now, the 5th investment that you should make is investing in your education, in the sense that investing in your education could multiply your income in the future. Ideally, it doesn't mean that you don't invest in yourself and in your education while you are paying your credit card or your other debts or building your first $1,000 in an emergency fund. But perhaps at first, what you're investing in your education is only your time and your effort. Once you have paid your debt, you have freed yourself from debt and from paying interest on that debt, you can start to invest actual money in your education. So that may mean starting studying something online, enrolling on a course at some university, enrolling on different courses somewhere online. Sometimes courses are even free online. It's just about putting the effort and the time. And that could mean that in the future, your possible income, your potential income is much higher. This means that the additional investment that you could make is much higher. Because if you're currently making $40,000 a year, maybe your other investments depend on how much you can cut back on your expenses. But if you invest in your education, perhaps you could eventually make 60, 80, 100. There's really no upper limit to how much money you could make. And then your other investments, your future investments, don't depend on how much you can cut back on spending, but really how much you can make. And so your future investments can be even bigger than if you didn't invest in your education in the first place. Speaking of which, number 6 in the list is investing on bonds, on government bonds from your country. This would become your first passive investment for the long term. So ideally, you would make this investment in the long term. So that would mean at least 7 years. And this would become a passive investment, something that you don't really have to think about. And it could even become a passive income source that preferably you wouldn't tap into it. You would reinvest any interest that was generated. So you would actually generate compound interest. But the idea here is that you create certain stability for you to eventually invest in much more aggressive ways. Now, to start investing in bonds, you don't actually have to wait for a return on investment in your education. You can start ideally investing in this even before. But if you can't, because you cannot cut any more of your expenses, you can tap into the 50% rule. The 50% rule says that you should destine 50% of the future increases on your income to your investments. The other 50% you can still spend. This means that you are not depending on cutting expenses today, you're depending on your income growing in the future. This 50% rule, using at the same time your investment in your own education, could have incredible results. At the same time that it is controlling your lifestyle inflation, which is something that we should always be careful about. If our expenses grow and grow and grow faster or at the same rate as our income, we never have enough and we never get to invest in other things and to save money for our future. But if we use the 50% rule, we ensure that at least half of any future raises, any future increases on our income is being saved and is being invested. And so the last step in this video, the seventh step, is investing on stocks, preferably through something like the S&P 500. And we would do this after we already established a very strong base, after we already have the stability of our investments in something very safe, such as bonds. The idea, for example, would be to start with a 90% bonds and 10% stock portfolio. So that would be a very conservative investment, one that has a lot of stability though. So starting with that stability, our goal would be to follow the 110 rule. This rule states that we should subtract our age from 110 and the result should be the percentage of our portfolio that we invest in stocks. So for example, I'm 30 years old. That would mean that I should invest 80% of my portfolio in stocks. 110 minus 30 is equal to 80%. So my goal would be to invest 80% in stocks, 20% in bonds, but I start with 90% bonds. And little by little, I increase the amount that I'm investing in stocks to 20%, 30%, 40%, and at any point, I can stop growing the risk. I can perhaps stop at 60% stocks because I was comfortable at 40%, I was comfortable at 50%, but at 60%, I'm starting to feel a little bit of comfortable with the movements in the market, so perhaps I should stick to 60% stocks, 40% bonds. I didn't just follow the 110 rule blindly, I little by little increased the risk up to the point where I feel comfortable. And maybe eventually I start to feel very comfortable with the 60% and I continue to 70%, 80% to finally use the 110 rule, but I did it gradually, which allows me to have the stability needed to continue this investment into the future. The other way to do this is to go all in stocks or start immediately with 80% stocks, 20% bonds, which exposes me to a moment where stocks fall 20% and I get scared and I claim that investing is just losing money and it's a waste of time and I never do it again. And of course that would ruin my future prospects and I maybe would take years for me to start investing again, and that is just a terrible outcome. It is preferable to start little by little increasing the amount of risk if that means having enough stability for me to get the best results in the future because I get to stay in curves. This actually reminds me a lot of what Morgan Housel, the author of The Psychology of Money, says in his book about not wanting the biggest returns, but wanting the biggest stability. And that having that stability, he thinks, will actually result in the bigger returns because that stability would mean that he gets to stay in curves the longest, which of course eventually means that thanks to compound interest, we get the best returns. So anyway, there you have it, these 7 different investments from the most urgent to the least urgent that you should consider making when you have some money available, listed in a way that this money that you have gets the best returns possible. That again, doesn't necessarily mean that it generates the biggest returns by themselves, but that maybe provides you with the stability needed for you to stay curious the longest, which eventually results in the biggest returns. Catch you in the next one.